it's still just as unclear. If there's pizza served in the dining hall, is that woke? If it's wood-fired, I'd have to say yes. But if it's Domino's pizza, probably not. But then again, and important to say here, I have no idea what the details of the policy itself were. I don't think they're ordering Domino's pizza into the dining halls.
No, that is also my understanding. Hello and welcome to Raw Politics, Newsroom's weekly podcast and video chat on the big political issues. I'm new-ish, Newsroom political editor Laura Walters. With me in Wellington is Marc Daalder.
Hello.
And joining us from Auckland is Tim Murphy.
Morena.
Today we are going to discuss the post-cab numbers nightmare, what happens when quinoa, not pronounced quinoa, and rice have a baby, and Green MPs behaving badly. And to wrap it all up, we'll offer you some recommendations.
And just before we continue on, I know people have been wondering where Raw Politics was. It was stuck in the cabinet process with Melissa Lee, working through quite a few thorny issues, couldn't get it past Winston Peters.
But there was a lot of consultation.
A lot of consultation, oh my goodness. But Paul Goldsmith became minister a couple weeks ago and got it right through, so we're back and we're happy to be here.
And better than ever. Let's kick straight into it. Aloha. It has been just shy of 6 months since this government took power, or 165 days to be precise. But Christopher Luxon didn't get the Hawaii-style honeymoon he was expecting. Tim, how do you reckon they're doing?
Well, I give thanks daily, Laura, that we weren't flies on the wall at that three-way honeymoon. I've realised this morning that I've been watching new governments come in for 40 years, and that made me feel very old, but it took me back to when Longy's government came in. So in terms of new administrations, I think this is the weirdest we've seen, and partly that's because of its fixation on ditching and repealing and removing and ending things. But partly it's been that it had a mandate between the three of them. It had a mandate from people who were sick of the other guys, and they were pretty sick of them, as it showed and turned out. And they're doing most or many of the things that they think that part of the electorate wanted, but they're not getting sort of loved for it, and they're not getting rewarded poll-wise, or even among those you meet. People just sort of saying, I'm not sure now, and they're not anti the government, but I think there's a strange lack of love from this honeymoon.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Mark? It sounds like a bit of a kind of a deficit mandate there, rather than people really excited about what they were putting out there.
Yeah, I mean it's some of the stuff we talked about during the campaign as well, right? That insofar as National was winning, it was by virtue of not being Labour rather than anything that they were outlining as a vision for the country. It's a very American style of politics in terms of vote for who you dislike the least. It's hard to imagine that there are that many hardcore Luxon stands out there in the same way as, say, Jacinda Ardern had her popular supporters. Maybe that's not quite the case with the minor parties, but by definition, they're minor. They've got a smaller constituency. And so for the vast bulk of the country, people who voted for National, people who voted for Labour, they'll be looking at the government with kind of, at best, maybe disinterest, and at worst, maybe a sense of concern or betrayal about, what was promised and what's come out of the coalition negotiations, looking maybe different from what National itself campaigned on.
And seeing some of the response, it must be really frustrating, I imagine, for Luxon. He's trying so hard, he's come out with all these plans, they've got all this action. He's going so hard on social media trying to speak directly to the people, and he's just not, like you say, getting that love back. It's not being borne out in the polls. His favourability isn't where you would expect for a new Prime Minister like this. And he's almost, I think, starting to come into his own a little bit there as well. He's being a bit firmer with his coalition partners when they're, coming out and making kind of ill-considered comments, as he put it. But it's not really having the effect that he would want.
Their campaign song was something like, the good days are coming. I can't remember the exact title. And they must keep thinking that. And in a way, they've probably got some grounds for that, because when people have asked Luxon and the other ministers repeatedly, what have you done to help people out with the cost of living? They keep saying, well, we're going to reform the RMA. And we are going to make the Reserve Banks focus on one thing, inflation. And the regional fuel tax in Auckland will go. But these are all things that all take time. And the tax relief that's coming from announced in May, we don't know when it'll take effect. These are all things that are coming. So the good days for them might be coming. They're dealing with this sort of mixed zone where they're sort of getting rid of the debris and hoping. But at the moment, yes, it's this peculiar kind of twilight zone.
It will be interesting to see what comes out in the budget there, because that tax relief will be the most tangible thing when we talk about the cost of living and the pain that Kiwis are feeling. So the response to that will be very telling. All right, Mark, Tim, I have some quick fire questions for you, looking back on this government's first 165 days. Tim, I'll start with you. 100-day plans, quarterly plans, keep them or ditch them?
I think they've already been ditched. It was a sort of a branding exercise. We won't hear much about the second quarter. I can't imagine we'll be having reports in like we did before, so they're gone.
Cool. Mark, what do you reckon?
Insofar as they continue going, if they haven't been ditched yet, keep them. I don't think they're a bad way to prioritise government actions, but they don't fix everything just by existing on their own either. They're just a way of shaping your priorities.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think keep them. It's a good way to hold them accountable, but it's not a good reason to use that much urgency in the House and trample all over kind of constitutional norms. All right, moving on. Are the poor results that this government is getting fair, Mark?
In the polls, yes, I think so. It goes to that point we were talking about earlier. It just reflects that no one's really in love with them. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are completely in hate with them either. But, if you haven't got that following, you're not going to get that kind of approval.
Oh, the people are always right. Mike Moir used to say the people are always right even when they're wrong. So, yeah, you can't argue with it. That's the reality. Whether it matters in 18 months from now or 2 years from now.
Is this the coalition of chaos? What do you think, Tim?
No, I don't think there's chaos, actually. It's a relatively ordered lot. But look for the chaos in the second half when the new Deputy Prime Minister, not because of him, but because who isn't Deputy Prime Minister, and whose parties are jostling and the tensions that will come out there. I think that's more likely to have aspects of splits and schisms.
I agree. We're kind of in that calm period now. They've settled in. There'll be calm for a little while, and then we'll get something quite chaotic at the end. I'm with you. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think the difficult coalition dynamics we're seeing aren't chaos at play. It's just that's how the coalition works and how the different bits of leverage that each party has are playing out. It's not chaos. It's just coalition politics.
Great. And building on that, who do you think's in charge, Mark? Is it Christopher Luxon?
I wrote after the coalition agreement kind of was revealed that it was Winston Peters and David Seymour's government and Christopher Luxon was just running it. And I still feel like he's in manager mode a lot of the time and feels like, he's the chief executive. He kind of makes it work, but the board is David Seymour and Winston Peters. And you still do sometimes get that sense. It's maybe less so now than before, but yeah.
What do you think, Tim?
Oh, well, I think Luxon, yes, but the other members of his cabinet will always look over their shoulder at Winston and David Seymour, always second-guessing themselves. So that's kind of, they're there as a kind of parallel, column.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Luxon's running it, but he kind of always needs sign off from those others, doesn't he? And lastly, will this coalition make it to the 2026 election? What do you think, Tim?
I never thought it would when they formed because of the extremes of the two minor parties and how their antipathy historically and of the leaders. It just depends on how desperate they all are to kind of keep for as long as they can. They shouldn't. This group of parties ought not to lose an election after 3 years. It's not our way in New Zealand. If they did, it'd be a pretty poor performance. But will they last? Yes, I think it will happen now. It just depends a little bit on the New Zealand First attitude to rebuilding closer to the election.
What do you think, Mark?
I don't want to give a prediction on what's likely to happen, but the two ways I see it falling apart are one, the Winston Peters kind of New Zealand First thing that Tim has outlined, and the other is if National really does recover in the polls, then at some point saying no to Winston or saying no to David Seymour on some ask that just is really unpalatable, and the government falls apart, he can go and run with that. But as long as they're sitting where they are now, he's trapped in the coalition. He can't say no because he'd lose if it did all fall apart.
I agree with both of you. I think they will make it there. I didn't beforehand or at the beginning of those kind of coalition talks, but the way that they have played everything so far, I mean, especially David Seymour and Winston Peters, we thought there were going to be fireworks daily, and that hasn't really happened. So I reckon they can hold on there for a couple more years.
Sushi, is it woke or not?
Is it woke or not? Exactly. On Wednesday, wearing his education hat, picture that as you will, David Seymour announced the revamped school lunches program. It was a great announcement, I thought. I thought he hit the middle of the road really well, but he just couldn't help going full Seymour. Marc, as our dedicated wokeness correspondent, you've been following this one maybe too closely. Do you want to fill us in on what happened?
Yes, I think there were details of the policy that were announced and covered very well by you on Newsroom, and I'm sure we may discuss them. But the real bit of the policy that was announced was that woke food is going out of schools. We've got 4 things that we have had confirmed as woke food by David Seymour, self-appointed investigator of the inquisition for woke food in schools, which is sushi, obviously, quinoa or quinoa, as the minister said. Hummus, which he said he had only learned on Wednesday morning, was in fact like if quinoa and rice had a baby.
And it was bad.
And it was bad. It's not that, but that's okay. And couscous as well. And things that aren't woke, we know sandwiches aren't woke and fruit aren't woke. Which raises the question, there's a lot of other food out there. What is woke and what isn't? There have been a lot of column inches written on this.
And tweets.
Many,
many tweets.
Some of which weren't published, but that's okay. And it's still just as unclear. If there's pizza served in the dining hall, is that woke? If it's wood-fired, I'd have to say yes. But if it's Domino's pizza, probably not. But then again, and important to say here, I have no idea what the details of the policy itself were. I don't think they're ordering Domino's pizza into the dining halls.
No, that is also my understanding. David Seymour said that his favourite lunch that he ever got involved a cream donut, and then he realised what he said and he quickly said, oh, but I'm not suggesting that we give the kids that. But I think that we can also add cream donuts to the not woke list.
Yeah.
I mean, I wondered when this woke food discussion took off so much, was it just a symptom of a very tired press gallery who is very ready for recess? Or did this kind of capture the attention and overshadow the more substantive announcement that was made by David Seymour? What are your thoughts, Tim?
Well, it did. And it was just a symbol of out of touchness, really. It's not even a word, but being so out of touch. The all-black dressing room has had bloody sushi sitting in there for about 20 years. When Graham Henry was coach, they put it in at half-time. They go in and eat sushi at half-time. So for David to still be sort of lurking in that area of things just said a little bit about he's a bit of a fogey. But look, he'd set himself, I think they had set themselves a bit of a minefield on school lunches, saying that, Labor was spending too much and there'd been a fiscal cliff and, it's largesse and it's not by need and it's just the heavy hand of the state and all that sort of thing. But I thought he, like you, Laura, thought he walked through it reasonably well to this point by avoiding cutting any one kid or any one family or any one group of kids from getting something. That sort of negated you're taking 10 or 20 or 100,000 kids out of play. But what they'll get, who knows? I mean, it won't just be, sandwiches and donuts and fruit. It'll be ghastly processed things as well, no doubt. And kids might not mind, but whether it's good or bad for them. So I thought that the policy actually saying we're going to do it look at it hard and properly beyond this, but to now we're going to cut the cost after this year, do it a different way, everyone's going to keep getting them, I think was wise.
And you mentioned as well that there's going to be a review and then we'll see some kind of overhauled plan in 2026, and I guess that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? What we actually see in 2026 could be quite different to what we see now, which not only, like you say, there weren't any cuts there. He actually extended it, his promise to extend it to 10,000 kids in ECE, which is a very significant change there, an expansion. Of course, quality matters, the quality and nutritional aspects of that food matters. But I think he went one further than Labor there, and no one really expected that from an ACT party member.
And I ask you guys, ECE was interesting. Were ACT's donors, did they include ECE, or is that another party?
That's a good question, actually. I haven't drilled down into that. I know that, well, I guess he's got the delegation for ECE, so he's obviously been speaking to those organisations a lot.
And it was a bit of a political neutering, I think. You've criticised us for this, but we're going to actually go higher or better than you did by bringing in little kids in their first 1,000 days. Minds are so important. I think he played back what he would see as woke thinking, almost played it back to people and sort of second-guessed them on that one.
Yeah. And, sorry.
I was just going to say, it was almost a perfect announcement, but for the woke thing, right? And it was just that having to bring the culture wars into how we feed children in schools, some of whom this might be their only meal of the day. It's basically unnecessary. It's politicking, and the shape and detail of the policy, that's a little bit politicking as well. But that's the kind that we go. It's for the greater good. We're talking about more kids getting school lunches. That's great. Bringing the culture wars into it was unnecessary.
It was unnecessary, but I read it as something he felt like he needed to do for his base. His ACT base didn't expect him to go further than Labor, giving out free school lunches. Like you say, the heavy hand of the state, well, here's a heavier hand from David Seymour, who wants to tell parents when to send their kids to school or not, when their kids are well enough to go to school or not, how to feed their kids, things like that. So his base needed something, and I think that was the little bone that they threw them essentially there. Unnecessary, yes, but maybe when he's constantly thinking, on one hand I'm a minister, but on the other hand I'm still the ACT party leader, how do you balance that in a big announcement? Yeah. And I just wanted to pick up on what you said earlier, Tim, about sushi and All Blacks dressing rooms. There's someone else who really loves sushi, and in Marc's investigative deep dive, he uncovered something pretty significant.
Yes. Actually, last week on the National Party Facebook page, there was a wonderfully informative video narrated by Prime Minister Christopher Luxon about what he does in an average day. And it turns out that for lunch he has sushi, typically. He was asked whether sushi's woke food, and he said no. He seemed quite irritated by those questions. Now we know why.
Yeah, and my thinking went straight to lock up budget lunch. So I actually got in touch with Nicola Willis's office. I thought they were going to tell me to get lost because they were very busy yesterday, but instead they did tell me that while budget lock-up food is a tightly held secret, what will be provided will be, quote, in keeping with the times. That means there will be no quinoa or hummus. I followed up. I asked about sushi. They said we'll have to wait and see. So I wonder if the Prime Minister's love of sushi means that it will be in the budget lock-up lunch, much to David Seymour's disgust.
Well, I'm glad the Newsroom gallery team is spending its time on such highbrow journalism.
As always. All right, in case you missed it, at the beginning of the week, the government made a $1.9 billion corrections announcement. But amid the post-cab train wreck, you'd be forgiven for forgetting what was actually in that announcement, what it was really about. Tim, you've written a bit about the Mark Mitchell, Christopher Luxon numbers horror show. What did you think?
Well, only that, ministers need to get their ducks in a row before they front. And he'd been a minister before as well, so there's no real excuse. As I said, Luxon is a rat-a-tat-tat man. He wants to get numbers out and he wants to get sort of a pace and a sort of appearance of action man. They love rolling up numbers, this government. I mean, all governments do, but this one in particular, because they chuck everything at it to get a big number. And so $1.9 billion was a big number. It wasn't a real number, really, in terms of extra money, but it was a big number, and it's over many years, and it covers a multitude of things, capital and OPEX and everything. But in terms of Mitchell, I think because they threw everything at it into one big thing, that he got confused, didn't get sort of his numbers in line. And then you could almost see it as he was being asked by the gallery about aspects of it, that a doubt just crept into his mind and his eyes, that flicker of, am I right here or am I not? And then Luxon kind of caught it a bit with one big factual error. Those things pass, and a 1.9 billion extra or 1.5 that the actual extra was will last, and a big super prison's on its way, which is another issue that probably does need more exploring by all of us.
And it was interesting as well how, while Christopher Luxon also made mistakes in terms of not really understanding what was capital expenditure, what came from the operating allowances there, he made a mistake as well, but he didn't really own it in the same way Marc Mitchell did after this happened. It was clear that it was Marc Mitchell that was going to take the fall for this. He made the mistake. He sent out the correction to journalists afterwards, and I actually spoke to him yesterday, and before I even asked a question, he was very quick to jump in and say, I made a mistake, tried to explain why he got a bit confused, but I think it was clear the conversation that happened there between Christopher Luxon and Marc Mitchell, who was going to be the person to take the fall for those mistakes. What did you think, Mark?
Yeah, I was there for the press conference, and afterwards I think people were leaving and reflecting on how they were more confused than when they had gone into the press conference, which is never a good sign. There had been a few post cabs like that in the Labour days. I'm thinking particularly around some of the lockdown ones, the level 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 kind of phase system for Auckland and that sort of thing would get a bit confusing at times. But just never what you want as a government to fail to communicate in such a way that people are just talking about your communication rather than the thing that you've been trying to announce.
Exactly, and like you say, Tim, it's an incredibly important announcement when we're talking about these American-style mega prisons and the type of money that is going to be going into the corrections budget. There is definitely more to unpack there.
And Mitchell's sort of predisposition afterwards to keep apologising, like to you, was almost like one of those scenes where you have a dog that used to attack cats and it gets a shock collar put on it. And so every time it then sees a cat, it looks away because it knows it's going to get a shock if it does, the same thing. He's almost been conditioned now to apologise on demand.
Once shocked, twice shy, or something like that. But it is not just the right that have had a shocker this week. Also, the Greens haven't been having a great time either. They seem to be stuck at the moment in this never-ending cycle of MPs behaving badly, and the latest this week is Julianne Genter. And Mark, you've written a bit about the Greens' woes. What do you think about this whole JAG debacle?
Yeah, I think it's not a surprise to people who have interacted with Julianne that she can be passionate, is probably the word that she would use. It seems like she pretty quickly realized that her conduct in the House last week, where she, crossed the aisle to kind of yell at or berate Matt Ducey about a transport issue, was, very inappropriate, and she apologized for that. I think there's generally a sense that, there have been a couple of other instances that have come out since then of her interacting with members of the public in that way, but it was people who had quite strong views of their own on things like cycleways and urban development in Wellington and so on. And so maybe not a sense that she's going around and just berating absolute random constituents and
Do you
things.
think that makes it any better, just because someone disagrees with her? Or do you think that maybe their retelling of the story is maybe coloured with that?
Yeah, I think that makes it less clear, to only have one side of the story, right? And a sense that maybe there's a motive for why there could be another side of the story. But also just people experience things differently. It's clear that it wasn't behaviour that an MP should engage in, and she's said that. I don't think there's a sense in the Greens that this is something that's going to stick around and it's going to blow over pretty quickly because, it happens. Tim van der Molen, for example, had his own intimidating incident with a Labour MP, and he's still, in the National Party caucus. He's not a minister, but he's there, and I think there's a sense of, people can get second chances in politics, as long as the offence isn't quite so bad.
And can they just not afford to lose another one, especially another high-profile MP? There's been a string of high-profile incidents. Of course, Golriz is out. Darling Tana, her future kind of hangs. Yeah. Yes, mysterious. Her future hangs in the balance. I mean, what do you think, Tim? What's going to happen with Jag, and why is this different?
Oh, I think she'll stay on. The only thing that she needs to deal with is the parliamentary. The privilege issue. It was an obvious one. It was just a loss of judgment and control, wasn't it, in the House? I think she'll get through that. She'll be ticked off, whatever that kind of sanction is, and she'll continue. But in some ways, I have some feeling for MPs who get accosted by very fired up constituents. I think we all would like, if it was us, to try and fire back and put people back in their place, but they can't, obviously. And probably, and she's admitted she has a bit of a short fuse. She gets very, very agitated over transport matters, which most of us wouldn't, apart from when the bus is late. I think she'll continue. No, they can't afford anyone else, because it's not just this term. Remember, they had that very untidy Elizabeth Kerekere thing at the end of last term as well, and the kind of the internal stuff about whether Chloe was kind of, whatever she was saying about her. So there was some negative, unruly stuff then. There's been a lot more. There's been a lot more incidents as well. They really need just to get things settled now.
Absolutely. And someone pointed out yesterday in the Greens reshuffle that Jag has been given the portfolio for regulation, and we wondered whether that was a hint from her party leadership.
Work on some self-regulation.
Yeah.
And I should say the other thing that people tend to get very agitated about in the transport space is trains interrupting recordings of politics podcasts.
Moving on to our audience question. This one this week came from a Twitter follower. And Mark, you've had a look at it, haven't you? So tell us all about it.
Yes, the question was, how much do our elected representatives get paid, including things like their special allowances and superannuation, and how much influence do they have over those decisions about their pay and allowances? So there's a lot of different kinds of numbers out there. Different roles get paid very differently. But I pulled up what the Remuneration Authority has recommended for the MP pay after a sort of phased increase. The PM would be on about $520,000, the Leader of the Opposition $309,000, a Minister $327,000, and a backbench MP who has no other obligations in terms of being on a select committee chair or anything like that is $181,000. There's also special expense allowances they get in the realm of $20,000 to $25,000. There's, of course, the accommodation allowance that ministers and MPs who aren't from Wellington are entitled to. I'm reliably informed that it is an entitlement. That's $52,000 if you're the Prime Minister or another minister, and $36,000 for MPs who are on the backbench or in opposition.
And it's probably worth noting here that these numbers are not set by the MPs or the government. They don't have control over this. They do have control over whether they take a pay rise or an allowance, though, don't they?
In a way. The Remuneration Authority is an independent body. It makes all of these decisions completely independently. But on 2 occasions, governments have amended the law to say we're going to skip a pay rise. That happened with Jacinda Ardern during the COVID period, I believe, and then as well with John Key during the financial crisis. And so that's theoretically an option open to governments. Chris Hipkins said a couple weeks ago that he actually thought that was a bad call by his predecessor, by Ardern, to stop MPs from getting pay rises. And there's a point to be made, right? It's a hard job. You should be compensated for it. No one gets into politics to get rich. There are far easier ways in terms of dollar per hour invested to get money. So, people should be able to live on that if they can. But the exact levels will always be open for debate.
And they should be able to live on it. And they shouldn't need, as our friend Jamie Arbuckle in New Zealand First thought he was going to do, was to take an extra $40,000 for staying as a councillor in Marlborough or wherever it is. That is just a try-on. And I find myself agreeing with the Taxpayers Union after he said he would give that extra council salary to charity. I don't think that's the point of it for the ratepayers of his district to take money and give it somewhere else. Personally, I think that's the wrong thing, and he's saying he'll stay doing both jobs because of the costs of a by-election, but ultimately that probably balances out the cost he's being paid to keep going in the meantime.
And he seems to be the only person that holds that view, doesn't he? Every other person, every MP and minister who's been asked about it has said this is a full-time job. If you're going to be an MP, it is a full-time job. You take the salary, you do the work. Same thing with the council and those local ratepayers, like you say. If you take the money, you've got to really focus on it and give it everything you've got. Right, let's wrap up with some recommendations, something you've watched, read or listened to this week that you enjoyed. Tim, what's your recommendation?
I'm straining a bit to make it political, but it is political because it's a report about the court appearance of the New Zealand Loyal Party leader, Liz Gunn, by the Herald Steve Braunius. Just a brilliant, funny, revealing court report on Liz Gunn and her activities that took her to the court.
Great. Mine is also politics adjacent. It's called The Tiny Nation at the Vanguard of Mining the Ocean Floor. It's a piece in the New York Times written by New Zealand's Pete McKenzie about how the Cook Islands is looking at seabed mining to get the minerals that are used in electric car batteries. A really interesting piece there. I would recommend a read.
My recommendation for this week is Laura's excellent piece on the New Zealand Initiative thinker who's behind or at least advocating for many of the education policies that the government has picked up. I think it's just a great interview, a good deep dive into a subject that's always really important, and recommending it gets me brownie points with my boss.
Yes, I'll pay you later. Ooh, thank you both. That's it from Raw Politics this week. Thank you to our producer, Hugo Stewart, and our readers, listeners and viewers. Please send any burning questions you have to laura.walters@newsroom.co.nz. You can find us here next week on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.